of the Comox Valley Regional District Electoral Area Services Committee for Monday, August 12th. And to let everybody know that we are now meeting on the traditional unceded territory of the Comox First Nation. I would like to also just remind the public that we are in the building here shared with the Ministry of Transport next door, and we share washrooms down the hall on the right. If you go down there, you can go and into the washroom area. Also, in case there is an emergency, we have exits, of course, where you came in. Also, an exit out here to the back parking lot and to the committee room as well. Should there be some kind of an incident, the mustering point will be in the parking lot out here in the front. Okay, so that being said, we have no delegation today. We have a management report for receipt. Any discussion on the management report? Yes, we do. And Director Arbor.
Thank you. So on item number 2, actually, let me pull it up as well. On the roadside waste collection. This is just a note. For some reason in the last month and since we brought in the Kilmarnock area, there's a lot of discussion already going on in the communities, and I'd like to bring that to the awareness of the directors and staff. I've got a couple thoughts maybe to add, because I know staff has already embarked, and Andrew's not here today, has already embarked on the work. But in a few of the community forums, a lot of people are, I sense perhaps the need to have some, or I'd have a request to see if we could put on some education session around what's currently happening to the garbage and recycling, because there's a lot of misconceptions already existing out there. So in Fanny Bay on Hornby, there's already really strong debates around people saying, you know, roadside doesn't work because the stuff doesn't get recycled as well, or da-da-da. So I almost envision if we could have Andrew or somebody like that come to the communities and kind of clarify the existing processes and the existing setups that we have across the valley. That might be just to set up a baseline for people for discussion. I would see a lot of value in that. So that's all I had, just as additional to pass on to staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Director and Chair, and we will ensure that we have a broad-based communications on this as we go through the process of evaluating the alternatives, and I appreciate your insight in terms of some of the questions that may be asked.
Yeah, I would further that, because I mean there's a lot of confusion over what is recyclable. You still see, you know, single-use plastic bags shoved in the bins and tin foil and all kinds of other stuff. And I think people are, you know, a little bit of money spent on education will go a long way. I know we talked about that at the AVICC Special Committee, and I know there's a plan for communications coming out of that. So I do think it's time to engage the public and let them know, you know, what commingling's all about and how it works, and the fact that a lot of these materials are recyclable at the proper depots, the MMBC or Recycle BC compliant depots. No, I'm timed out already. I would like to ask one more time about the working with the City Coordinator and Provincial Government to establish parking areas and delineate public access to points in the Lower Solom River and Dove Creek area. I know we brought this up over a year ago, and it's sort of winding its way through. I'm thinking now it's probably with the heat of the summer, mind you, we haven't had, blissfully, we haven't had a scorching summer like some places, but you know, the loss of the swimming holes and access to them, I think, is a major concern, and maybe it's something we should look to be on the strategic plan again next year, and if we can get any headway with that. I know that Alicia next door has already left or is leaving, and she was kind of the point person with MOTI. So I just wonder, you know, realistically, if we're looking at a timeline for 2020 on that, because I do think it's very important to the public that we get these swimming holes access to these points, because if we lose them, and we've lost a lot already, then we'll never get them back.
I'll just ask Doug DeMarzo, our Acting General Manager of Community Services, to come forward and give you a bit of an update on this project.
I'll get you, Doug. There you go.
Thank you, to the chair, to the directors. Essentially, we are working on the project. Staff and Parks has been a little short this year, as you're aware, so it's been a little slower than we had anticipated. And we would hope to do a bunch of work in July, but the weather wasn't that great. But some work was undertaken. We're actually expanded the scope to look at the whole Solom River and all the accesses that Modi Roads kind of provide, so we can look at it in the general terms of how it's serving the population. So we'll come back to you with a report outlining that probably in the fall once we've finished our surveying work here this summer, and look at what options are available. It'll be similar to some of the inactive parks reports you might have seen in the past, or even the beach access reports looking at that type of format.
Yeah, I would say that because we are a little short on capacity right now, that there's really no rush, that we've kind of missed the window this year. So I'd rather do it right than do it rushed. And I think that maybe next spring is a good time to bring it back. But I do want to keep it on the burner. I think it's important that, much like our beach accesses, that we strengthen our position and delineate the accesses so that we make sure that property owners, don't go digging a ditch right across the access and put a chicken coop right on the trail. Thank you. Okay, so we are in receipt. All in favor of the management report? All in favor? Done. Advisory Planning Commission minutes for receipt. Moved and seconded, and just want to speak to any of the minutes in particular? No? Okay. Then on receipt, all in favor? That passes. Number 2, Electoral Area A, Development Variance Permit DV 5A19 3719 Cameron Road, Staples, for receipt. Moving second on receipt, and over to CEO for introductions.
Thank you very much. And Ton True, our Manager of Planning Services, joins us at the table, and several planners will help to provide the information on the upcoming reports. The first is Jody McLean, Rural Planner.
Welcome, Jody.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also have the applicant for this file, Mrs. Kaylee Staples. She'll join me to the table. She can help explain the file.
Thank you, Jody.
Through the chair to the directors. So this is a development variance permit to vary the height. The zone allows for a maximum height of 10 meters for houses. It's measured from above natural grade. The owners began construction of a house that was designed to be 8.76 meters tall. However, after adding fill on top of the natural grade to accommodate a covenant that's on title regarding the floodplain of the Roy Creek, and after adding trusses on top of the house, a surveyor found the building's height to be 10.37 meters. And so the applicant is requesting a variance to 10.45 meters to allow for the completion of the house. This is subject to public notification, but we received no letters from the public on this one. The Advisory Planning Commission did review this file also, and they supported it, and staff also supports the issuance of this variance. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jody. Any questions from the directors? Director Harper.
No, this one looks good to me. It was nice to see the sort of the APC rationale for the recommendation as well. And congratulations on the new house. It's good by me.
Okay. Is there anybody in the gallery wishing to comment on this? Seeing none, I'd like to excuse from the table. And thank you very much for coming down.
Thank you.
And we'll take a vote on receipt. All in favor? That carries. Now, whoever moves it reads it.
I'll move the recommendation that the board approve the development variance permit DV5A19 Staples to increase the maximum permitted height of the principal building from 10 meters to 10.45 meters.
Second.
Any further discussion on that one? Call the question. All in favor? That carries. Thank you very much. Item number 2, Electoral Area B, Development Variance Permit DV9B 19-1919, Thurber Road, Barnsley, for receipt. Moving second on receipt. And over to Ton for introductions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, to the directors. I'd like to present Brianne LeBeau to present the next 2 files of the variance. Thank you.
Welcome.
Good morning. Through the chair to Electoral Area Services Committee. So I'd like to invite the applicants on this file, Jack and Pamela Barnsley, to join me at the table here in case any additional context is required. So the request here is to reduce the rear yard setback for a secondary dwelling from 7.5 meters to 5 meters. The property itself is fairly small. It's 0.27 hectares, and it has dual frontage on Thurber and Lupin Road. And it's constrained by the existing siting of the house, which is right in the middle of the lot there. The fact that it's a small lot for the CR1 zone, and the location of underground utilities and the rear driveway on the lot. So they're proposing to move on a recycled home to be used as the secondary dwelling. And so a few factors to consider here is that the CR1 zone applies mostly to larger properties because it has a minimum lot size of 2 hectares. So when we have these smaller historical subdivided properties, sometimes it can be a bit tricky to meet some of those setbacks. So as a comparison, the residential one zone would require a rear yard setback of 4.5, quite a bit smaller. Another point to note is if this was to be an accessory building instead of a secondary dwelling, the height is approximately 4.5 meters, so it would be able to be as close as 1 meter to the rear lot line. So this is quite small, I would say, in relation to most secondary dwellings. A carriage house, for example, could be up to 7 meters. The property to the rear there is mostly developed as frontage on Anderton Road, so there isn't really any development directly behind this property. And across the road, the property is already developed with a house and a suite. And so this proposed secondary dwelling would essentially be looking at their accessory building. So the visual impact overall is expected to be minimal or negligible on all the adjacent neighbors. No written comments were received from the neighbors or phone calls. The Advisory Planning Commission supported, and the reasons being they thought the variance request was reasonable and there's no adverse impacts from the variance. Staff are recommending issuance of the variance permit just with the condition that a fence or a hedge is maintained along the rear lot line. That's just generally considered a best practice to make it clear where the lot lines are as you're starting to get closer to them. There is an existing wire fence already on the rear lot line, so it'd be a matter just of maintaining that. Or if they wanted to lose the fence in the future, they could do a hedge instead. Okay, that's it for me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. And comments from directors? Director Hamir.
Right, thank you, and thanks for the report. I was just curious what the property to the rear is, the REM one. Is that what kind of zoning is that? Or I saw it mostly forested.
On the survey there, the REM just refers to a remainder lot if there's been a subdivision. So sometimes they won't give it a new lot number. So it would have just been a result of when it was subdivided. It's not a different zone. It's the same zone. And another thing I took a look at is, does it have subdivision potential? Because that could change how the lot ends up being developed. But due to it being in the settlement expansion area and having that minimum lot size of 4 hectares, it won't be subdivided under the RGS.
So that's going to be a single lot for the, okay.
Thank you. And Director Arbor.
I don't have any issues with this application. I do have a question from your presentation, which is when you compare the CR, I don't want to alarm planning staff because I know we're completing our zoning bylaw review, but has it been considered to kind of bring CR1 into just R1? Because you mentioned that for these kinds of lot sizes, typically it'd be R1, but this is kind of a historical thing. So just for my education, I guess, is the question.
I think it can be tricky because zoning looks at setbacks, but also looks at uses.
Yep.
So CR1 is a zone that allows full agricultural use if the lot is over 0.4 hectares. So I think the zoning
0.4, okay.
didn't always take into consideration all this kind of strange historical subdivision. It also just mostly grouped uses together. So that would be one change, I guess, if you revert it over to R1 exclusively, is the loss of the full agriculture if you have 1 acre
Yep.
or 0.4 hectares.
Right. We're not going to do that because we already passed the draft bylaw. Thank you.
We could always rescind it. Okay. Do the applicants have anything they wish to add?
No, other than I just appreciate the process. The last meeting we were at, people had great questions and, listened and really well, and we just really appreciate everybody's time in this.
Well, very good. And anybody in the gallery wishing to comment on the matter? Seeing none, I'll excuse you from the table while we take a vote on receipt. And thank you very much. So on receipt, all in favor? That carries. And somebody else's turn.
Well, I can't find my document.
That the CBRD, the Cumberland Valley Regional District Board, approve the development variance permit DV 9B19 Barnsley to reduce the minimum rear yard setback for the proposed secondary dwelling from 7.5 meters to 5 meters and reduce the minimum yard setback for the eaves of the proposed secondary dwelling from 5.5 meters to 4.5 meters.
Second.
Moved and seconded on the motion. No more questions? All in favor? That carries. Thank you very much. Now, Electoral Area B Development Variance Permit DV7B 195956 Aldergrove Drive. Moved and seconded on receipt. Back over to staff.
All right. I'd like to invite the applicants, Dean and Deborah, to join me at the table. Oh, and John Gower, thank you. Okay. So this property on Aldergrove Drive, there's a number of variances requested, and a similar situation, it's a CR1 zone, but it's a small lot. It's 0.17 hectares, so it does have quite big setbacks. In addition, because of the road right-of-way, Eel Road, there's also larger road setbacks associated with that. So there's an existing house on the property that the applicants are proposing to remove and have recycled and have become someone else's new home. And then they would like to build a new house with a covered deck and a detached one-car garage. So the first setback that they're requesting is from Eel Road, and that is from 4.5 meters to 2.75. So the staff report noted that they would require approval from the Ministry of Transportation, and I just wanted to note that that approval was received last week. So why do we have larger setbacks from roads? Well, it's mostly to make sure future activities in the road allowance are not impacted by the development. We see a lot of interesting beach accesses just as a result of the subdivision regulations and having to have beach access every so many meters when new lots are created. So they're not always conducive for use such as trails or vehicle access. So in this case, this road allowance is very, very steep, and there's a large drainage ditch that runs down the side of it. So its ability to be used for anything in the future is unlikely. Looked in terms of neighborhood character to see if similar variances had been approved, and just down to the south there was a very, very similar variance that was approved from Seabird Road to go down to 2 meters. Another thing we look at when we think about reducing setbacks is that it can result in sometimes in drainage issues if there's not enough room beside the building for water to percolate. In this case, the applicants are proposing a full rainwater harvesting system. That was part of the reason they chose to cover the deck, to have more roof area in order to collect more water for reuse in the house. In terms of visual impact, the neighbor's dwelling is actually at the bottom of the slope, and this house would be near their accessory building, so the visual impact is expected to be minimal. So the other setback, the two other setbacks would be in relation to this proposed one-car garage, requesting to reduce the minimum front yard from 7.5 to 6, and then the side yard from 1.75 to 1.3. Again, if we compared it to R1, the setbacks would be quite a bit smaller, and it may work within those, but because it's the CR1 zone, it has larger setbacks. Something might be worth noting is if the accessory building was a little bit shorter, they're proposing 5.72, but if it was 4.5, it could be as close as 1 meter to the side lot line. So it's a result of it being a little bit higher that it needs a bigger setback, and that the applicants just had a desire to match the roof pitch to the dwelling. There is a large hedge between the properties, but the applicants have been in discussions with the neighbors of actually having that removed. It's become a bit of a nuisance, but they're proposing to put a fence between the properties. In terms of neighborhood character, again, there's been very similar variances that have been approved on both the abutting properties, which are also likely struggling to fit within a constrained building envelope due to the steep slopes and the floodplains. Of note is the applicants, prior to construction, if the variance is successful, they still have to go through environmental development permits in relation to the steep slope and to the ocean as well. No written comments were received by neighbors. The APC spoke about this application for about an hour, actually, so they really were going through what the different possibilities could be, and in the end, they found the variance to be reasonable and noted that there was a real lack of flexibility to do anything different because it's such a restricted lot. So staff do recommend the issuance of the DVP with a condition that there is fencing to delineate the northwest property boundary where the accessory building is going to be, just in the vicinity of the accessory building, not necessarily down the slope itself, but again, as you get closer, it just helps to have that clear line that shows whose property is who. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very good, thank you. Any questions from directors? Director Arbor.
Thank you. Yeah, overall, it sounds good. The only one I was twitching at a little bit is the setback to Eel Road, which is probably some kind of beach access. So I wonder about the future if it starts to enclose that road too much or whatnot. But I didn't find it sufficient to not support the application. Just more of a comment, I guess. And I think the rainwater features are great. And yeah, congrats on a new house.
Very good. Does the applicants have anything to add?
Not a lot. It's difficult to say it more clearly than Brianne did. I guess I would just say that we feel we're building a modest house here. We're not being driven. I guess I understand it could feel a bit weird that we're in here asking for 3 variances, but I just wanted to point out we're building a new home that's actually smaller than the home that's there now, and adding a single garage. So it's driven by the complexity and the constraints of the site, and so I think that's all I would say.
You're prepared to live by the beach, are you?
Yes, we're...
Stainless steel hinges on your outside doors and all that? Oh, good.
Yeah, thank you.
My cousin thought he was too. Well, good luck. Thank you very much. Anybody in the audience speaking to the matter? I'll just like to excuse from the table. We take a vote on receipt. And thank you for coming. On receipt, call the question, all in favor. That carries. And there is a recommendation.
Move the recommendation. Don't tell me I'm lost again. Is it number 4? Yeah. That the Comox Valley Regional District approved the development variance permit DV7B19 to reduce the minimum side yard road setback from 4.5 meters to 2.75 meters for the dwelling. Reduce the minimum front yard setback from 7.5 meters to 6 meters for the accessory building, and reduce the minimum side yard setback from 1.75 meters to 1.3 meters for the accessory building.
And seconded? Any more discussion? All in favor? That carries. Thank you very much. Okay, 5, Electoral Area C. Development Variance Permits DV5C 19-8575, Laurie Road. And, over to Don.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be presenting this file. I will ask the 2 owners, David Lockett and Rosie Holhouse, to attend the table with me.
Welcome.
So the subject property is located at 8575 Laurie Road. The property is within the Agricultural Land Reserve and Zone RU ALR. The applicants were building a carriage house without the benefit of a permit. Due to ALR regulations, a carriage house is not permitted without approval from the ALC. To bring this building into compliance, the applicants have stopped the construction of the carriage house and wish to convert their structure into an accessory building. A BCLS surveyor confirmed that the building height to be at 6.91 meters. The maximum height for this zone for an accessory building is 6 meters. Therefore, a variance for the height is required. The increased height is not expected to affect adjacent neighbors due to the dense trees and vegetation around it, but also the location of the structure is located at the rear of the property. The request variance meets the intent of the maximum building height regulation for the accessory building, and staff recommends the issuance of the DVP. This file was presented to the APC on July 18th. The APC supported this application, this proposal due to it is consistent with their residential characteristics of the neighborhood, but also with their vegetation and tree around the structure. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very good. Any questions of the applicant? Director Hamir.
Great, thank you, and thanks for your report, Ton. So just a question on what kind of accessory use would you use instead of it being a carriage house? What are you planning to do with it?
It's mostly going to be storage now, and I have a home business on the side. I'm a stay-at-home mom, full-time mom, but I do organic skincare, so it's a place to store my bottles. Right now, it's all in the house. So just, a little bit of a work studio for me.
Okay.
Yeah, workspace.
And just a question around the process of what happened, when this building was being constructed, was there a permit issued for construction, or were the applicants thinking that this is a farm sort of building? Sure.
To the chair, to Director Hamir, the applicant did apply for a building permit for an addition to the single detached dwelling. At that time, when their building inspectors went out to the site, they noticed a structure being built. At that time, their building inspectors informed the applicants or the owners that you are required to get a permit for the structure. There were some questions and answers where it was passed along, and planning and building informed the owners that due to the property being within the agricultural land reserve, that second residence is not permitted without approval from the LC. But also with it's required a building permit too.
Yeah.
So at that stage, their applicant came in. We spoke to them and got this process going for them.
Great. Thanks.
So was it before the February 28th or 24th or whatever the deadline was when Bill C-52 came in? Or?
So to the chair, this is a carriage house. The bill is more to do with modular homes for a family member.
Yeah.
So this is a structure for a second residence. It would be a non-farm use application to the LC for the second dwelling. Yeah.
Okay, well, it'll make a nice studio. And I hope there's a wood shop downstairs somewhere, I think, with some equipment in it too. Oh, that prompted a question. Director Arbor.
So just for final clarity, so this will still need to go to the ALC then, or?
To the chair, to Director Thurber. No, so accessory buildings are permitted on agricultural land reserve.
Yeah.
If it was a farm building or an accessory building for residential use, the ALC does not require approval for that. Yeah. The ALC only requires approval for more than one residence or use. So.
Yeah.
But they do require it for mobile.
Yes, mobile is classified as a dwelling unit, and with their changes to the ALC, with their modular home, there's a 1-year grace on that right now.
Okay, the reason I ask is over time, I'm not talking about this particular application, but applications in general, we know there's a trend of many of those studios being converted into habitable places, but I guess that's an ALC kind
Yeah,
of,
to the chair, to Director Arbor, their ALC regulations allows you to have home occupation,
Yeah.
which allows you to have a smaller business within residential buildings.
right.
So the ALC allows that to be permitted without their approval, which is consistent with the zoning bylaw.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Learn something every day. You folks have anything to add?
For me, thanks.
Okay, then anybody in the audience wishing to speak on the matter? They're dwindling. Okay, I'd like to excuse from the table and we'll take a vote on this. On receipt, all in favor? That carries, and there is a recommendation. Okay.
That the board approved the development variance permit DV 5C19 to increase the maximum building height from 6 meters to 6.91 meters for an accessory building.
Second.
Seconded. Any further discussion? Take the vote. All in favor? That carries. Thank you very much. Now, we're going to move on to the bylaw enforcement semi-annual report and move seat and over for introductions.
Thank you, Chair. Amanda Yasinski is here, our Manager of Bylaw Compliance, to present her report and answer any of your questions.
Hi, Amanda.
Good morning, through the chair. So today I have our semi-annual report for the first half of the year. So these statistics are to the end of June. And I can speak a bit to it currently, but it's a bit behind. So for that reporting period from the beginning of the year to June 31st, 102 files were opened. We're currently sitting at 127, but when this report was written, it was 102. Some highlights of this reporting period: we had an ongoing barking dog issue in Area C, so that finally resulted in MTI being issued. The barking, bark logs were passed out to the neighborhood and then wished for us to pursue with the ticket. So the dog owner has challenged that, and we're just waiting to hear back for a court date in provincial court, and staff will be prosecuting that on the regional district's behalf with the help of the neighbors. As well, bylaw staff, we've started using the civil resolution tribunal for collections, or instead of collections on tickets, and sometimes there's some payment leniency through that program as well for individuals. They do have an opportunity to challenge it. It's a more formal process. So we've had great luck with this one. It's an online version. It's a $50 application fee for a local government. And if we're accepted and successful, the fee goes back on to the accused as part of the ticket. There is an incentive for individuals to pay. They get one last chance before we proceed, so they don't have to pay that administration fee to the provincial court. So that's been great leverage for us as well in compliance with those. 38 municipal tickets or tickets have been issued for that reporting period. The majority of those were animal control related. A lot of dog at large and licensing. Most of our licensing tickets, if someone comes right in and purchases the license, I make that ticket a warning. I'd rather have them have the license, unless it's an ongoing dog issue and other challenges from the property. Bylaw staff has completed, or had until the end of June, 15 specific enforcement patrols for CVRD parks. Try to include everybody in that. Specifically assisted with a pre-scheduled Sunday patrol of the Royston-Cumberland Trail, and that was solely to identify and speak with individuals on motorized vehicles, quads, dirt bikes, even licensed vehicles that have been accessing the trails, and creating a problem for park staff and for people trying to enjoy the park. We met a lady on a horse who'd had a couple incidents, so it was great. We talked to everybody when we were out there. And we were able to identify some plates from that information and sent out letters to those individuals. The quads and the dirt bikes, a little bit too quick for us, but the smaller all-terrain vehicles with the plates, we are able to follow up with them when we get that owner registry. As well, we've also scheduled Sunday parks patrols for the remainder of the summer as well. So some have already occurred, other than the ATV one. We have some coming up. We've had one at Nymph Falls, the Royston Cumberland, also Seal Bay and the Royston Seaside Trail. And those two are specifically for animal control type things, talking to everybody whether they had a dog or not, so they knew we were out there. Also for this reporting period, it's died down a little bit, but at the time, we received quite a few more formal complaints about odor regarding cannabis in residential areas. Not so much in the agricultural areas, but in right in cul-de-sacs we get them, and really tight-knit residential areas. So the odor complaints, we've had a 100% success rate on them. The focus has been compliance, and that's filtration, what they've done for odor reduction, and also just neighborhood awareness that they can either come through us, or maybe they've now established a relationship with the individual who is growing. Quite often they're quite private about it, but the neighborhood's aware, they can smell it. So once they realize that, they're not as guarded and more approachable. It's pretty hard to hide them. Proper filtration on these has been key, and staff is learning more about what that looks like now once the mediation has stopped. There's a mistake on my report, my apologies. We've quoted in the background that there's 110 files open to date. There was only 102. 110 was last year at this time, so we're slightly behind. I think we're picking up pace though. 17 of the reporting period were related to illegal dumping, which is reported separately, but I thought I'd mention that. And 92 files closed, so we're kind of in and out about the same, roughly. Staff also fielding 760 phone calls related to specific files, and 468 of just general enforcement inquiries, which sometimes translate into a file, but just general inquiries. For animal control, they've been quite busy. Just shy of 1,100 dog licenses sold at 1,092 for the term. We always like to have about 1,400 for the year, so we'll see if we can get up by the end of the year. As well as 44 barking dog complaints, 14 aggressive incidents, and 1 dog bite. That dog bite did translate to a dangerous dog file with some containment orders on the property, which have been abided so far. And 91 reports of dog at large. And animal control has its substantial 481 parks and trails patrols during their time out. They're to stop every time they can and engage the public at a park, on top of doing their call-outs and regular patrols. It's been working quite well. Nothing specific for legal factors on this report. Just again to mention that we're utilizing the CRT, the Tribunal for Collections, and having great success. And that's it, unless there's any questions.
There's always questions. Director Hamir.
Thank you, Amanda. Thanks for the report. You kind of answered my question. I was wondering where we were in comparison to last year around this time. So I'm wondering for future reports if there's an ability to do a comparison year just compared to last year, so we can see if there is trends going on. And then, so a second question was around cannabis. So the odor complaints are for growing or for use? Or is there a way to distinguish the difference? Yeah.
Yes, through the chair. That's a good question. We have not received one complaint yet on use or consumption. It's been something we've been aware of in our parks patrols if we'd gone into high risk, is to not single anyone out. For parks, if there's no smoking in the park during high risk, doesn't matter what it is, just no smoking. So we're prepared and put some thought to that, but we haven't moved into that this year because of the weather. So the complaints that we've been tracking have all been around the odor from the actual growing, not consumption.
Right.
We may, but not yet.
Okay, yeah, because I don't know how you would control the odor of that, and because generally, a personal use doesn't have filters and stuff like that. So, yeah. And then just the last comment, because I know, in the agricultural area, and because we've had so many animal control kind of issues going on, what is the process if a neighbor's dog attacks your farm animals? Is it a same process, or is there a different process? What, if you don't mind going through?
Yeah, through the chair. So legislation allows us, there's clear language on what defines a dangerous dog. We've used it word for word. So what it is any animal that has seriously injured or killed domestic animal, any animal who has seriously killed or injured livestock. So it's the same process. Quite often, depending on damage done to livestock, whether that, we won't go into detail, there may be costs that farmer or owner of the livestock wants to incur back from that, depending on the value of the animals. So that's something we can't be involved in, but we tend to get more freedom of information requests to that effect if they're going to go civilly.
Okay.
But that dog involved, we automatically go back to history we have, maybe other jurisdictions that happened before. Is it been reported before and we didn't know where they lived? So trying to build the whole picture and go from there.
So is it a single incident that then can declare that dog a dangerous dog, or does there have to be multiple reports? Or?
Yeah, it can be. So if it's the first incident's maybe, chasing and they go through the fence and they're injured, likely not right off the bat. But if it's something that's quite drastic and it does happen, then yes, it would escalate it.
And then that file, the dangerous dog file, it stays with that dog, or does it end at a certain time?
It stays with the dog. In my time here, I've only ever had one individual try to have that removed, and we offered them to have a private assessment done at their cost, and they declined. They felt that the dog had matured enough to move away, but it does stay with the dog.
Okay.
And it's also shared valley-wide, so with the other animal control agencies and municipalities. And quite often we get requests from other areas, Lower Mainland, all over, to see if a dog is in our area. One that they may be tracking or that's moved away, or maybe even a heads up that one's coming. So it does, they are tracked.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
And Director Arbor.
That's great. It's going to be interesting to see in the next couple of months if the cannabis complaints go up even further, because that gets to be the maturing smelling season for some of the outdoor greenhouses facilities.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, you should. It's all legal now, so or most of it, some of it. My question, so we have 110 files opened this year to June. And so cannabis is one project we'll look at in planning over the next coming year. The other project we have is vacation rental review. How many complaints do we have related to vacation rentals?
Through the chair, the vacation rental reviews through Ton and his staff. Currently, I don't want to give you wrong information on how many files we have to date.
An approximation?
I believe we've had currently today 8 this year.
Out of the 110?
Out of 102.
102,
Yeah.
right, sorry. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My question is around motor vehicles using the trails, and I know that it's endemic everywhere. What is our maximum ticketed fine for that? Is it enough to deter people?
Currently, it is not enough to deter. The end of the season, we'll be reporting back to parks on the hours spent and our findings and suggestions around signage and increasing fine amounts. It's hard to stop them. They've been quite resourceful and quite damaging to the
I know.
barricades that have been put up.
Mm-hmm.
And quite frustrating for park staff and the residents. It's, I think, become a bit of a game in some of the parks with individuals accessing on the ATVs to get around the barricades.
What's Modi's fine now for littering the highways? $5,000?
That's their maximum. Realistically, it's probably going to be around 100.
But if you had a sign that said, report with the number on it, take a picture with your camera, license plate or whatever. And like you say, I mean, the rules don't apply to, 7% of the population. They're above the law anyway, so you got to. But at least if they had, good signage and it alluded to a maximum fine and gave people a tips number, then that might deter some of the more sensible people. But we can talk about that later. Good. Anything else? Well, thank you very much for your semi-annual report.
I just wanted to circle back to the chair on Director Hamir's comment on the graphs and the differences year to year. I have made a note from budget season that you'd like to see that for the end of the year, so we've actually already put some thought to. So we'll make sure we have that, because I'm curious too. Thank you.
So we are on receipt. I'll call the question on receipt. All those in favor? That carries. Thank you very much. Now, strategic planning for electoral areas. A report for receipt. And over to CAO.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. This is in response to a request that you had at your last meeting, and the report is brief but outlines to you the opportunity of a strategic planning session that the board is having in October, and the intention to include on that strategic planning the needs of the rural communities to ensure that there is an opportunity to review at that time. As well, we are presently going through the process of confirming a permanent position for the General Manager's position for Community Services. It's many of our services that we provide to you are come within that branch, and we will be looking at putting in ways and means for that individual to be responsible for you, to reporting out on the good work that we're doing for the electoral areas and ensure we're responding to your needs. So at this time, that's what I propose. If you have any questions or comments, I'm here to answer.
Director Arbor.
Yeah, thank you for responding to the request. I got 2 or 3 comments. One is, I think what we had in mind last month when this was discussed, it might be a bit fine-grained for a full board session, in my opinion, because there might be issues that relate more to the electoral areas itself. So, for example, I might exclude South Sewer from that session and look at more fine-grained stuff around rural areas. So I'm not sure if we would want to take up the useful time of the rest of the board on issues that really may just pertain to us.
I can hear Ken Grant right now.
You can hear what? Ken. Oh yeah, why are we talking about this stuff? Okay. So that's just one feedback. So I would just caution that I didn't have a problem in how rural areas were covered and considered by the board at the last session, because there were topics that really were affecting everybody, when we were talking about sewage and talking about agriculture and things like that. But I'm talking about more fine-grained stuff, which is some of it is before us today, like the community works, some of the park services, things like that. This said, I reflected over the weekend, and my second comment probably relates to your comment about the midst of hiring a general manager of community services or on a permanent basis. That might be a good opportunity, and maybe I would request if we would consider some kind of process to have discussions with that person, either in a session or with individual directors or whatever else, so that we dig in a little more around the fine-grained stuff. So I don't have more precision. Generally, I can support the report, but I think with what's happening in the rural areas, I'm glad to see the staff report, and I'm hopeful that we'll dig in a little more on rural topics.
Well, seeing no other lights, I'll jump in on that. Yeah, I think, as you say, when we do our strategic planning session, we have the full board there. Personally, I certainly don't want to bore the rest of the board with things that are beyond their comprehension. The convoluted works of electoral areas and regional districts. So I would think, and a good point that Daniel brought up is the fact that we are missing a position right now. We are down on capacity. So maybe this could be almost a notice that maybe a session in the new year would be more appropriate once we have that position filled. It's going to be a learning curve, obviously, for whoever takes that position. I've always maintained that you almost need a designated electoral area manager person that's live to all the issues all the time, because it is very vast. Our CAO has to wear 2 hats all the time, which is not easy. 4 if you consider all 3 electoral areas. 115 overall. How many? 99 different services? We have 102 now. Okay, it was 99 for a while. So yeah, I think it's important that we do have a discussion among us, and certainly once we get staffed up, geared up to that level, then it would be a really good thing to do. We could a little forethought could go into it. We could prepare for it properly. What my experience has been in this position is you never really know what's coming around the corner. You think you do, but something's going to come around that is right out of left field that you didn't expect. So, we need the contingencies for those things. So I would think that we would just go ahead with our regular strategic planning session. We would bring out issues that include the municipalities and include possibly First Nations. But when it comes to things that are specific to the workings of electoral areas, and then I do think that we have to put a little thought into that and maybe delay it until we can actually get some traction. So I would not be in favor of having a special session there. Like I said, I can hear a certain director in my right ear right now, sitting on my right, that would say, why are we sitting through all this? So, I think that we keep the focus on things that pertain more or less to the greater area. And Director Arbor.
Yeah, just a final comment on this. As was mentioned, everybody else has their own strategic sessions. The Comox First Nation, the municipalities, everybody does. And I mean, I don't mind right now doing some of the work. I end up doing some of it myself in the communities, but they're not necessarily connecting back to staff. So, for example, there's economic development discussions in the South area, so I'm connecting with the Comox Valley Economic Development Society on this, but I'm not finding that we have any kind of thing that can relate back to some kind of area, rural area specific strategy that I can point at, right? So, or another example, when Moti came to us, I didn't have the sense that as a group of 3, we could list to Moti a list of our priorities for the entire district around either capital improvements or things like that. And I would find value in having some of those advocacy points ready, or find a channel. I don't know how to channel those requests right now, which I can through a letter, I guess. So there's other processes that could be considered, but I think that's the driver for why I see value of us having a little more around that. Thank you.
Anything else?
Mr. Chair, if I just want to assure you that the format that we have for the strategic planning will enable this to facilitate your concerns without infringing on the comments that you've heard from the municipal directors. We have services that are provided to just the municipalities, so we can break out into 2 different groups during those times or otherwise. But what's valuable for me as the CAO of all the services is to ensure that everybody is aware of the demands placed on the organization, and there's a communal buy-in or acknowledgement to all that there is. And one final comment, just when you have demands of your area residents regarding Modi or others, just lean on us to help you steer through those. One of the benefits to being a rural area is you don't have the costs of a municipality. One of the problems is you don't have the same control over services like roads or otherwise, so we can help you build expectations from some of the demands you may receive from residents.
You owe me a beer at Gladstone's. Well, yeah, not to belabor that, but, you know, we are a strange beast. My understanding was when they created regional districts, they were going to review it in 5 years. As of yet, I don't think they've had much of a review. Did have the task force back in 2010, 2011 that brought forward a whole bunch of suggestions that were gratefully received by the province and then shelved. So, and I do say that, you know, we don't have the levers of power. It's very important that we build the relationships with senior government ministries. That being said, sometimes, like we said right now, I mean, Alicia's leaving us here, and she's, you know, been here a while and is quite live to a lot of our issues. So we got a new one coming in. I think that, you know, sometimes we rely on ministries and well, you know, they can be more concerned with their, shall I say, their career path than a multimodal pathway sometimes. So we've got, you know, we've got that challenge all the time with especially Flynn Rowe and Modi and whatever. So I mean, it's not an easy go. I do think that I always try to tell people that, you know, we are the most cost-effective form of government. We are the most responsive. We are the closest to the people. We operate on our kitchen table, you know, pretty much. So it is what it is, and we have to make the best of it. So I do think that when we do get new staffing, that you know, that we have to make sure that they are live to the challenges of electoral areas. And, you know, obviously our staff are working all the time trying to build relationships with provincial ministries. Sometimes they come through, sometimes they transfer them. So, you know, we've seen a few issues. Okay, so that's just for receipt. Call the question, all in favor. That's done, thank you. Denman Works, request for Denman Island Economic Development Service Reserve Funds to support the additional 2019 local economic development grants for receipt. And
Thank you, Chair and Directors. Kevin Duval, Manager of Financial Planning, is here, and he will present the report and the recommendation that's provided to you at the request of Denman Works and answer any of your questions.
Thank you very much, to the Chair, to the Directors. So the report in front of you stems from a request staff received from the Denman Works Economic Development Agency. Part of their operating grant annually is dedicated to local economic development grants that they make available through a defined process that's been in place for a number of years now. So, for example, this year their operating grant was $45,000. $16,000 of that was dedicated to these local economic development grants. So they put a request for applications out to the community. Those applications are received and then vetted by an adjudication committee. That adjudication committee then puts recommendations forward to their board, and then they subsequently submit that to staff for our review and recommendations. This year they received an unusual number of applications, and two in particular that far exceeded the capacity of that $16,000 pot of money. So they have put a request forward for some additional funds coming out of the future expenditure reserve in the Denman Island Economic Development Service. In essence, staff is recommending that we conduct or put forward a budget amendment in order to facilitate that, largely due to the fact that in 2019, we received a one-time repayment of prior year surpluses from Denman Works to the tune of $16,667. As a result of that, those contributions coming back to CVRD, it will result in a net impact on the reserve at the end of December 2019 of about $8,000, which makes it certainly a lot more palatable, and I think is you know, still leaves a sufficient number of resources within the reserve. And in particular to the two additional projects they want to fund. One is for the Denman Island Internet Committee, which is working, as the board or directors know, with the Hornby Island Internet Committee to look at the internet connectivity on the island. The CVRD board has already previously endorsed that application and directed staff to submit that on the behalf of the two organizations, which we have done. So this will provide kind of the last piece to that. And they're also looking to provide $17,000 in funding to the Denman Housing Association for their Denman Green project for a number of preliminary activities that they want to undertake. So I think I'll leave it at that and certainly welcome any questions.
Questions? Director Arbor?
Actually, not a lot of questions, mostly a couple comments. I really want to thank staff for assisting in submitting the internet application with the two groups. It's not there's a few, but it's not many projects that you see such strong collaboration between Denman and Hornby, and it's nice to see the CVRD support it. And let's be hopeful for the future. It's no guarantee of improved internet yet, but it's working towards that. And for Denman Green, tough but promising project. Number of challenges. I actually met with the two housing groups earlier this month and the island trustees on Denman, where, by the way, we may or may not receive a letter from stemming out of that meeting around the whole question of a housing function for the island. I think you've heard me speak a couple times about that. So the Denman group definitely is going to have a broader discussion amongst themselves and then decide if they request our assistance on this or not. And on Hornby, we shall see as well. And for Denman Green, part of why I'm happy to support the request is, they are, it's sort of, kind of initial funds, they're really at the start in terms of engineering feasibility, and what really, I think, de-risks our investment is I believe they're receiving some assistance from Macola Housing, which
Correct.
some of you would know. And so I think a lot of the diligence and the procedures and all that is being well looked after between the group and that organization. So I'm supportive of both requests.
Any other comments? Director Hamir?
Right, thank you. This just spurred on right now. Do you know if that 6.35 million from BC Housing has been confirmed, or that's just the suggestion of where the funding would come from?
As far as I'm aware, that's still in process. I'm not aware of any formal confirmation. That is the estimate that's certainly been put forward to BC Housing, and BC Housing, from my understanding, has been supportive, but those details still need to be finalized.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, call on receipt. All in favor? That carries. And before we go on to the next one, I'm just going to call there's a recommendation. I'm sorry. Then I will entertain Director Arbor to read the recommendation.
Okay, I'll move that the 2019-2023 Financial Plan and Capital Expenditure Program for the Denman Island Economic Development Service Function 555 be amended by increasing operational grant expenditures by $27,000 in 2019 to be funded by way of a contribution from future expenditure reserve from Reserve Function 555.
Moving and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor? Congratulations.
Thank you.
Denman works. Okay, I'm just going to stretch my legs for 5 minutes. Call this meeting back to order, and we are on number 9, Hornby Island Arts Council Community Works Funds request. Moving second on number C.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors, and Kevin Duval will lead us through the report, staff report, and Doug DeMarzo, who helped with it, is also here to answer any of your questions.
I'll get you on there. Onesie, twosie, there you go.
Okay, thank you once again, through the chair to the directors. So the report in front of you is in follow-up to the June 10th presentation to the electoral area directors by Dr. Andrew Mark and the Hornby Islands Arts Council requesting $175,000 in community works funds to support their proposed arts center project over on Hornby Island. At the conclusion of that presentation, staff was directed to bring back a report outlining the status of available community works funds, the potential future uses by CVRD services for those funds, and any authorizations that may be required if the directors were to entertain extending these out to third-party organizations. So some key points I'd like to bring forward to the directors are as follows. Firstly, a review of the status of the community works funds and some potential projects coming forward over the next roughly 4.5 years, which takes us to the end of the current community works fund agreement with UBCM, indicates that there could be a shortfall of funds within the Denman and Hornby Islands allocation. And I'll spell out kind of that in a section. It's actually included on table 1 of page 5 of the staff report. Secondly, the community works funds do present a unique opportunity to the CVRD to fund projects in rural service areas, particularly some of the very small service areas that do exist on the two islands. These funds do provide opportunities for our local service areas within those two regions to access funding that they may not be able to otherwise, that their only other options would potentially be to tax for those additional funds. And given some of those service areas are very small, have limited tax bases, these are certainly a viable alternative to access some dollars for much needed infrastructure projects there. If we do make community works funds available to outside agencies, we would want to ensure that there is a formalized process in place first, which we currently do not have. Otherwise, any applications come forward could potentially provide a precedent and limit the prospects for future access to for CVRD services to these funds. And lastly, currently the CVRD doesn't actually have a suitable or related service through which we could provide these funds. I have indicated that we could possibly provide those through the Hornby Island Economic Development Service, but again, that's not specifically dedicated to this kind of project. So again, on table 1 of page 5 of the staff report, we've provided a table that demonstrates the kinds of projects that we've identified internally over the next several years. And I've focused specifically on both Denman and Hornby Islands. So to give you some context, in addition to the funds that were identified in the Community Works Fund status report that the directors received in June, if we extrapolate out to the end of 2024 over the entire regional district, there would be potentially about $8.6 million in community works funds available for various projects over the 3 electoral areas. Specifically for Denman and Hornby, that allocation would be $738,880, and that's calculated currently based on the 2018 census. That could change slightly once the next federal census numbers kick in, which would be 2021, and then that would get adjusted at that point. Currently, to the end of 2019, there is $329,360 available for the Denman and Hornby allocations. Some of the projects that were identified include the Denman Island Cross Trail, Piercy Road Beach Access, some additional dollars that may need to be reserved for the Denman Island Water Local Service Area, Graham Lake Improvement District conversion. At this point, we don't have numbers available for that. There is a grant application pending for the Shingle Spit boat launch, but in the event that grant application were to be denied, we want to make sure we have some dollars dedicated for that. And then some additional comfort stations as well that have been identified through the Hornby Island Residents and Ratepayers Association for another $45,000. So I think it's important to note that the agreement between UBCM and CVRD does contemplate that regional districts may want to entertain applications from third parties. If that is to go forward, it does recommend that formalized processes are in place, and specifically that third-party contribution agreements, are signed between the regional district and that third party, and I've provided some information on that in the staff report. The purpose of having that formalized process in place ensures that as the CVRD, we can continue to fulfill all our obligations under that agreement, that we're ensuring that there is a fair, open, and transparent opportunity for all eligible projects and nonprofits within the valley to come forward with potential projects, that we are demonstrating that there is a strong alignment with the current CVRD strategic priorities. Again, that we have a suitable service through which to flow any funding with respect to community works funds to any third parties. And there are specifically 2 required board motions that would have to be undertaken if applications of this kind were approved. Firstly, the CVRD board would need to indicate its support for the project itself. And second, it would have to put forward a motion authorizing a transfer of the community works funds to the third party for an eligible project that includes eligible costs. This was done, with some substantive analysis being undertaken by staff, looking at other regional districts throughout the province, seeing how they deal with any third-party requests. And at this point, I can say that each regional district deals with this somewhat uniquely. Many keep the funds completely internal. Some actually put them solely out to the community for those opportunities. Others do a mix of the two. But I can certainly say any of those that do put it out in this manner do have a well-defined, well-communicated public process in place. And they do, as part of that criteria, make sure that they address the issues with respect to things like alignment with strategic priorities and et cetera. So I'll perhaps leave it at that and certainly be welcome to answer any questions.
And Director Arbor.
Thank you very much, and thanks to staff for the work they've done over the past couple months on this. And I'm definitely in favor of us delineating a process moving forward for community works, which would move us from sort of the words you use, which was internal use of community works funds, towards more what I view as net public benefit, especially in places such as the Gulf Islands, where these communities only have us and our pots of funds. So there's an opportunity cost to everything that gets done. And I think the danger of continuing on the internal use of community works is a growing disconnect between what the CVRD might see as priorities and what communities might see as priorities. And also, we also lose a big opportunity for leverage when we do that. So when you bring up the boat ramp, I think we approved a certain amount of potential community works fund, but we certainly did not approve $400,000. And I think I would probably not survive the next election if we put $400,000 into the boat ramp on Hornby Island. So I note that the staff also talks about alignment with the strategic priorities of the board, which are, the 2019-24. I do not see an alignment with many of the projects that are on the dockets. I do not see how the boat ramp or the Denman Island Cross Street, necessarily fits better than the Arts Center project. In the case of the Arts Center project, I do see how it's central to the Economic Development Society strategic plan of 2015 to 2020, which was funded by the CVRD. And this particular project is widely supported. They're looking for a 15% contribution from local government for $1.2 million, so that spells of partnership. So in general, I would compel my fellow directors is that I think it's possible to do both. I think it's possible for us to create a process for the future, but also because it's a timely request to address this one and approve it. I would say some of the issues that were also highlighted around the concern for that formalized process. I would note that in 2016, we did a Community Works contribution to HIRA for the install of solar panels, so that precedent has already been set. And I don't see how if one did not trigger this, then why would this one necessarily negate the opportunity today? So I'm in favor of proceeding with the funding.
Thank you very much. Director Hamir.
Well, thank you. I think most of what I actually wanted to say was already said by Director Arbour, that I also appreciate that when you do partner with local groups, the ability to leverage dollars. And so we end up actually really increasing our benefit into the community because these nonprofit groups are able to bring in other dollars that to match or even exceed what Community Works funding provides. So that's one thing. And I was actually wondering how important that the shingle spit boat launch was to Director Arbour, because it is a huge a very large contribution. So I'm glad to hear that, if that went off the docket and to say that this is a potential funding kind of allays some of my fears about, running out of money for specific things. I guess my other question was just on the timing of the amount that's being asked by the Arts Center. If that can wait for strategic planning, or if that needs to go ahead fairly quickly. So if staff or anyone has an answer to that.
I think you may have received correspondence from Andrew Mark, who's here today, that can clarify in terms of their needs in terms of timing, and I think it's rather urgent for them to know. I would just like to go back to that last chart and say this, is that any of the items that are on there, you may have various levels of support for, but all those items have been developed in consultation with communities. The boat launch was an issue identified by community members as an issue. That's why it's up there, because of the partnership that we have. And you're right, we may not see a final commitment to that in terms of these funds required for it, or it may be less, but you have to realize we're trying to foresee the potential needs of these funds to 2024, and what's not on there are the needs of our services that may find themselves in crisis, or the needs for capital improvements that we have yet to identify. Remembering even on Hornby Island, we have a variety of different services that we are delivering in partnership with the community, and I foresee there probably will be a need for them to come forward. Our garbage and recycling service is an example where we're just in the initial stages of identifying any, issues or crisis in terms of service delivery, and I expect that over the next 5 years that will be another item that we will be looking at improvements in order to provide the services that will probably include capital works too. What those are, I don't know, but I'm just saying that once you spend these funds, they're gone for the period of 2024. And we really hear you in terms of your desire to work with the community. We hear you in terms of what a great proposal has come forward for this particular one. And you are provided with two options. Our recommendation as staff does remain as what it is, but there is the alternate option if you see differently and wish to support this at this time.
Director Arbour.
Yeah, I find it timely how the three issues that are on the agenda today kind of interrelate. We'll have the next one that we'll deal with as well into the granting process for some of other services, and it's going to come up next. But I want to echo our CAO's thoughts, and another good example, is basically opportunity costs and priorities, which relates back to our strategic planning for rural areas kind of discussion earlier, which is how do you prioritize and what do you hold on to? If I take another example outside of the islands, say that we don't end up spending the $1 million that's currently on the docket for the Bain Sound area, we still haven't quite discussed what other projects those monies could support. So I think I don't want to seem like I'm jumping on the first project that's showing. I'm jumping on this project because I think it's well situated, well leveraged, and is exactly the type of project we want to support in the future. But at the same time, I concur with that need to balance a defined pot of money and make really reasonable decisions around those allocations. So thank you very much. And I will be moving. I will likely move option 2 at the end of the discussion.
Thank you, Director. Couple of questions. Now, when UBCM allocates the Community Works funds, they specifically cut a check, basically, to the main sound, so that the electoral areas each receive separate funding?
I can answer that, no. They cut one check to the regional district. It's the corporation that holds the money. And then it's up to that board to determine whether they wish to allocate it again in terms of population. There's no requirement that the allocation of the expenditure of these funds be done by electoral area, let alone subgroups of electoral areas such as Gulf Islands.
So do we also hold a check then for the municipalities?
No, municipalities get their own funds based on their population.
But we need the municipality support to spend our Community Works funds?
Through the budget process or the adoption of the budget, but otherwise the issue and debate of allocation is made at the electoral areas?
Correct, but in this case, again, the 2 board motions that I did identify would have to go to the board of directors for a formal
Because of requiring a contract or entering into an agreement.
Correct.
So the municipalities, they don't need our consent. They don't consult with us, right?
Point made.
It goes back to that comment before about rural areas, less taxation, less government.
And yet they don't entertain, like North Cowichan, they don't entertain district municipalities anymore. Well, there you go. I mean, I think what has to be kept in mind here is we are the elected officials. We are the ones that are there to bring forward projects that would best suit our particular individual electoral areas, and they're all different. In fact, they're different within our electoral areas. I think that I was reading here and that well, this might be best brought up on the other item, but basically, you know, that local societies and volunteer organizations build civil society. They create local social institutions, develop leadership and social cohesion in the community, and they leverage far, far more for the buck than you do from government. So I think that, you know, all the electoral directors here right now are basically mayors of their community, and I think that there's precious little discretionary dollars out there as there is that's under any of our control or influence. Interesting. I was reading Charles Handy, who is the GM of Royal Dutch Shell for 20 years, and he calls, you know, I mean, rather than filtering everything through layers of bureaucracy, he calls it the curse of efficiency. And sometimes the focus on organizations is keeping the organization safe instead of focusing on core goals. And they pay attention to narrow measures like cutting costs or payroll, reducing the inconvenience for suffering from staff. Rather than try new ideas, they try to avoid conflict. So, you know, that's basically what we're up against. I think we have to be firm in the fact that somehow we have to get our interests to the top of the heap. And this particular one, I'd like to know how much tax dollars flow into the regional districts from the electoral areas. And then here we are talking about $175,000. So I think we have to put it in some kind of perspective here. and I will be supporting Director Harbour on this. In our discussion on receipt, call a question. All in favor? That carries. Do you want to read the second recommendation?
Yeah, and before I move it, I'll just say, really good discussion, and I think a consequential one. I'm not fooled by the impact this could have on our practice going forward, and that it may create more work for ourselves and all these things, but I wouldn't promote it if I didn't think that it really helps build those communities in a way that they see themselves reflected. So I'll move that definitely in terms of the process, the recommendation 1 by staff. I'll move that the Comox Valley Regional District authorize the implementation of a formalized process as outlined in the August 6, 2019 staff report for the consideration of future requests from external nonprofit organizations within the Comox Valley for financial support utilizing Community Works Fund.
Vote on that. Any more discussion? All in favor? That carries.
And the second, from the staff report, I would like to move option 2 in regards to the Hornby Island Arts Council request, that the request from the Hornby Island Arts Council for $175,000 in Community Works funds to support the construction of a new art center on Hornby Island. Whoops, am I reading the wrong one?
No, you got it. Pretty sure.
Be approved. No, I lost it. Actually, I was reading option 1. Be approved subject to staff confirming all requirements of the CWF agreement between the CVRD and UBCM being met. B, the CVRD indicating support for the project through a formal board resolution. I'm hoping we'd be able to get that to the board this month. C, staff being directed to prepare a contribution agreement between the CVRD and the HIAC, or I don't know if should I say in the IHAC or HISEEK? I'm just asking for a bit of, because you made a comment about that, where the funds should flow through.
Do you want to comment on that, Kevin?
Again, it would potentially flow through the Hornby Island Economic Development Service. That service happens to fund HISEEK, but again, it's our own internal service. So those money, if we do move forward with this, those monies would flow directly to HIAC.
Got it. Okay, thank you very much. So I can keep it the same. So the staff be directed to prepare a contribution agreement between the CVRD and the HIAC that sets out all pertinent commitments of both parties, including but not limited to those outlined in the August 6th staff report. And finally, D, that the CVRD supports by way of a formal board resolution the transfer of funds to the HIAC to support the project and its eligible costs as outlined in Schedule C of the CWF agreement.
Call the question. All in favor? That carries. Thank you. Okay, number 10, CVRD grant funding service, criteria and procedures, a review for receipt.
Second.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. Another joint report, and thank you. And this one, Doug DeMarzo will speak to and answer any of your questions.
Thank you. Through the chair to the directors, this is looking back at a motion to look at the Arts and Culture Service, but we've expanded it in this report, as you've seen, to go a little further and look at all the CVRD grants and the funding services that we provide. We administer several services that enable us to be, enable outside organizations and local governments from throughout the Comox Valley to access operational capital or eligible kind of grant type projects. So really we focused in on a few of the key objectives is ensuring alignments of projects with the CVRD's core values and board strategic plans. We also are looking for transparency. We're looking for equal opportunity so all organizations know how to apply and where to apply and what might apply to them through the granting processes listed here. And we're also looking for greater certainty to some of our longstanding recipients, because this also helps them receive other funding if there's greater certainty in the processes. So really, we reviewed the best management practices, and we looked at a comparison of other grant programs around BC. And what we hope to achieve at the end of this is reviewing our functions and looking at, some criteria and requirements, what could enable this to work perhaps more smoothly or better in some cases. What we hope not to achieve is to create a more cumbersome kind of program in the long run. We want it to remain easy and transparent for our community at large, I guess. We have a few options in front of you. Some of it's developing criteria and processes or recommendations, which is the recommendation in front of you for best service delivery methods. You can also request further information from staff, or you can just leave the administration of certain services or all services in its current form. Some of those services include our arts and culture, which is 615, and that's for improving services and possibly operational contracts that function under that. Grant and aid is mentioned, and some of the prior discussions have been looking at new community hall services or reviewing guidelines for applicants. Another example is the Denman and Hornby rec grants. In light of the new changes to the Denman Island community facilities, we thought it was an opportune time to review this. Our Heritage Conservation Service is just looking at ideas such as consolidation or combined service. So we're not really looking to predict any of these outcomes. What we're looking through is really a process to do that, which I'll speak about a bit later. But I'll just let Kevin briefly go over the finances. It's really about being able to, in our budgeting process though, is about being able to look at the full financial impact it has on an annual basis. And of course, each service has its own uniqueness when it comes to the funding models. So did you want to speak a little bit to this, Kevin?
I can quickly through the chair to the director. So again, the table in front, up on the screen here just kind of indicates what the 2019 requisition for the various services that would be covered within this review and what the maximum levies for each of those services currently are. In the vast majority of cases, we're not going to be running into any issues with respect to approaching those max levies. We have some comfort there. But again, we do have a number of services that cover, kind of the various aspects of granting. And, what we felt would be good to include in this review is just kind of a review of all of those specific services and whether keeping them as independent standalone services is still, beneficial and worth going forward with, or should we be looking at some expansion of those purposes within those services and perhaps even collapsing some of those services together, heritage conservation being one. Right now, the capacity within the individual services themselves are pretty small. Doesn't provide us a lot of opportunity to support any worthy projects in that regard. If we were to potentially look at bringing those together and having, again, a process to kind of appropriately vet those applications, it would give us a bit more financial capacity. And we've also been talking internally about whether or not there should be an expansion of the purpose to bring in more of the planning aspect that really that service would be appropriately designed to cover with respect to heritage planning. But at the end of the day, like I say, some of these services, have much greater capacity, rec grant service as an example. The remainder, again, from year to year, those capacities can be pretty limited. So we just want to ensure we're using those dollars as effectively as possible.
So looking onwards, just a little bit of this will look to unfold.
Director Hamir, did you want to speak now?
Sure, actually, because you've actually kind of pointed out one of the issues that I had concerns about was the heritage grant. Seeing that there's very little requisition that goes into it and what capacity that had. I'm wondering if you have an idea of what kind of grants would have come out of that service in the past. What were we supporting through heritage? Because it sounds like maybe if it got collapsed into arts and culture that it might make more of a better difference, unless there's something specifically heritage. I can't recall unless.
Through the chair to the director. So right now, the only, I would say, consistent application we receive is from New Horizons on Hornby Island, and that's specifically to support their heritage archives. It's a very small amount, about $2,000 a year that we contribute to that. And again, we don't necessarily get an application from them every year, but we have over the last number of years. Outside of that, we have supported some Comox First Nations initiatives over the last couple of years out of the Heritage Conservation Services. outside of that, there's not been a lot of uptake with those funds, so we do
Yeah.
just kind of tend to carry them over and try to build up some capacity to deal with projects that may come along.
And we can look into sort of what the history was and the purpose was when it first was created to see if there's any reasons or rationale there that would be relevant to you and share that with you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
Did you want to speak, Daniel? Yes. Okay.
Just while we're on that topic, yeah, I want to echo that it'd be good to get a sense of the historical one, because I had the same thought around the heritage, but then I found out that the Union Bay Historical Society used some funding for that old post office renovation, and they may approach us again in the near future. And I would just want to make sure that stuff like that could be captured somewhere, so that if that bylaw was rescinded, would it fit the art and culture? You know, those kinds of questions that I think staff would look at. So, but I like the thought of doing a full review and seeing how things align. Please continue.
All right, so back into the presentation, we'll just, ahead of you on the screen there is just sort of an indication of the timelines and how we plan to proceed. Essentially, we're in the process of looking at the background. Some of the discussion that's been happening here is happening currently. We'll be reviewing our establishment bylaws because this may impact what that looks like when this unrolls. Here in August, we're in the board support stage, looking to obtain support for the larger package per se. Outreach will happen, you know, it's a good opportunity to meet with the grant recipient meetings and other interested parties to let them know this process is underway. It's a good opportunity also for public outreach. So, you know, we're butting up to September now, perhaps even October before the new GM's established in place to start running on this. So we'll be doing that outreach in that period. Hopefully in November to February, after taking all the best management practices in and looking at what we heard through the outreach, we'll start doing some of the guideline development, either maybe reporting back with some updates or moving forward to seek board approval in March, June. I guess the key is next year's budget cycle, 2020, is probably going to look much the same as this. There may be a few adjustments if need be, but really we're looking to be in alignment with the 2021 budget cycle. And then that's really all we have to present to you. We're open to questions here and looking forward to reviewing these grant opportunities and seeing if we can help make it easier for the community, really.
Director Arbor.
Yeah, I'm actually really excited about this, about elements of this work, so I really want to thank you for the time you're putting into it. I think yesterday I got notification that the Sports Commission just went online with their registration program and things like that, and for me, I think it's a good time to, not only on the tech side perhaps, but on the overall side to bring best practices forward. And I think it'll enhance the clarity for applicants around some of our funding channels, and may also help us a little bit on the measures of success for our own accountability purposes. So for all those reasons, I'm really supportive of this work.
Well, I take a little different view. I think that, you know, we asked for a review of arts and culture, function 615, and I can support adding function 600 to that, direct grant. But you have to remember, I mean, when we talk about function 600, outside of DIRA and HIRA, the only thing in there that gets actually funded outside the municipalities is the Vancouver Island Mountain Center, Sports Center. And that took a hell of a lot of work to get that to that point. I don't think any of the people around this table were there at the time. You know, again, I'm just alluding back to Charles Hanley and his curse of efficiency point, that at least when it comes to, I can support most of it, even the heritage grants and conservation. But when it comes to grant and aid, I think that is the one and only discretionary spending that we have as directors. And I would say that was sacrosanct. I don't want that to be watered down or controlled by staff. I heard it's their money, right? So I think that if we can keep that out of the mix, I can support it. I think that we aren't running amok here. Again, we're talking about a grand total of $612,000. And I ask again, how much money pours into the coffers from the electoral areas? So I think my feeling is it's the thin edge of the wedge, that it's going to be watered down. I know that by giving grant and aid, again, we avoid a lot of the administration costs that are, I think, ka-ching 10% every time, whatever function, isn't it? Is it 10%?
Most of the granting functions pay minimal support service, so it's pretty nominal.
But I mean, that could change. So I am not going to support the grant and aid functions. I'd like them to stay the same, at least until we have our manager in place, so we can, and at least till we have a discussion about electoral areas and where we're going to go on this. The rest of it also includes the municipalities, except for the heritage grant services. And that doesn't really account for very much anyways. And like I say, it's not even subscribed every year. I think I've subscribed twice to it. Once when they moved the church from the old Sandvik church, and the other one for to support the 100th anniversary of the Merville Hall. So it's not a big one. Otherwise, a lot of these monies are spent for us. Like, you know, we help with the First Nation journey, you know, but that fit, but it wasn't our idea. So I don't know. I just feel a little shaky about this one. I think that at least the grant and aid should remain discretionary. It doesn't amount to much. We are nowhere near a full requisition on what we could raise on that. But I mean, it supports good stuff. And once again, I point to all the advantages of channeling money through local societies and volunteer organizations. But I'll turn it over to the directors. Director Mayor?
Thank you. Well, on that, just a question to staff, or with this review, specific to the grant and aid, was that something that was going to be considered, that the decision-making be changed? Because I know for myself, not having a process of reviewing impacts or, you know, how the money was spent was a little bit, and seeing consistent applications was a little bit, shall I just say, different for a grant service. So I did want to see that reviewed, but I'd echo that this is, you know, on the decision-making side, is that something that you're considering changing, or?
Do you want to go ahead? Okay, through the chair to the director. So at this point, we are not anticipating any significant changes other than just making sure we're a bit more upfront with what the process is.
Yeah.
It is difficult, admittedly, to find any information on our grant and aid programs through our website currently. So we want to make sure we really elevate the promotion of those opportunities. As we've noted in the staff report, and speaking to your comment with respect to some of the ongoing applications or organizations that we fund on an ongoing annual basis, community halls specifically, given we already have community hall services in place, and we are funding up to 8 community halls pretty well every year out of the grant and aid service. We're suggesting that we would undertake a review of that to see if we could be better funding them through more of a a standalone service that gives those groups some greater certainty as to whether they will be receiving funding on an annual basis.
Because I know, like, one of the organizations that was consistently applying for grant and aid and then got changed over to a line item was the farmers market. And so, something like that I would support. It meets our strategic goals, and it provides stable funding for that kind of organization. Having organizations, forcing them to continually apply every year and then it's up in the air, I think it's not great for both of us. So I still am in support of keeping that grant and aid service as part of this review.
Thank you. And Director Arbor.
Yeah, to Chair Greaves' comments, I think you've got some valid points, but in a sense, I'm seeing this a bit like Dr. Amir was saying. I don't think there's going to be a cookie cutter approach to this. I think what we're looking is to update. And again, like when I was talking about technology, is there a way that we can have one place on the CVRD website where all those grant opportunities are listed, and so it's clear for people in the public what the processes and opportunities are. I mean, we have them, but it's sort of somewhat. When I used to have to search for them, it was all over the website, and then from a process perspective, just to clarify the process and where we need stronger measures, let's have them. And ultimately, today we're approving a review. We may disagree with all the recommendations that come out of that review, but I'm glad that review is occurring, and we'll have a more meaty discussion once we get those recommendations from staff forward. That's the good part of my excitement, if I can clarify it.
And Mr. Chair, if I could just add that, yes, let us do the good work of the review and give you the options. And we definitely hear your interests and concerns around the grants and aid. And ultimately, these will only be recommendations for you. But I think definitely all the services could use some tweaking in terms of transparency and access. And at the very least, benefit from that. It doesn't necessarily mean a full-scale erosion of the authority that you have to determine the grants and aid in the end.
Well, it's just as long as I say reading through this, and instead of focusing on core goals, we get quite often sidetracked. And the curse of efficiency rings in my head. So I'd be willing to support it, to come back with a report, but I just like to fire a salvo over the bow that, again, we're being squeezed and squeezed and squeezed all the time. Even our grant and aid has to be approved by the board. Even our own individual electoral areas that we collect millions of dollars in taxes from. To give back, $80,000, I have to get approval from the city of Courtenay. So I'm just a little leery that we're eroding what precious little levers we have already. Failing a review by the provincial government, I think that we're not in a position of strength. Let's put it that way. Okay. So anything else? No comments? On receipt. Call a question, all in favor. Opposed, carried. And over to Director Arbor.
I'll move that staff review the electoral area's arts and culture grant service, function 615, grant and aid services, function 1 2024, Denman and Hornby recreation grant services, function 605, 606, and heritage conservation service, function 691 to 695. For the purpose of developing guidelines for applicants, ensuring a transparent process and equal opportunity to funding, determining if some initiatives should be funded by contract rather than relying on grant processes, determining whether new community hall services are warranted, and evaluating the possibility of consolidation of services or grant programs. And that staff bring back a report reviewing the above and provide recommendation.
Okay, I just want to say that we're looking at getting approval by June 2020. So we're not rushing this through before the next budget cycle, correct?
Correct.
So we will have staff in place at that point.
Correct. Yeah, we soon came to realize that there was just no time available to try to put this ahead of the 2020-2024 budget process, and we wanted to make sure we did come back to the directors with a fulsome review and some solid recommendations. So it was agreed that we would kind of aim this to the following financial planning process.
When it comes to community halls, you may have your wish, because with the new regulations around fire inspection, I don't think any of the halls are going to pass the muster anyway. So it's going to be doubly difficult for local organizations, community organizations. So you may get your wish.
Not our wish. We're just there to help when they need us.
We appreciate all the help we can get. Okay, all in favor? Those opposed? That carries.
Thanks.
Feel like Peter Sellers in Dr. Strangelove. Okay, so are we at that magic moment?
Recommendation going Kim.
We need to go, seconded?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? In camera? Clear the courthouse.
Yes.
I'm going to change it out again.